Welcome everyone to Education Connections, Dollars and Cents with Bellevue Schools Foundation. Thank you all for being here. My name is Chandana Surlu and I'm a trustee with the Bellevue Schools Foundation. Today, Melissa deVita will present and hold a discussion about the funding model for all 29 public schools within the Bellevue School District. Melissa deVita has been the Deputy Superintendent of Finance and Operations for the Bellevue School District for the past 8 years. She relocated to Bellevue from Colorado, where she held a similar position for another school district. Prior to working for schools, she was a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, working in their management consultancy services practice. She has an MBA from the University of Michigan. Melissa lives in Bellevue with her husband and 2 children. One graduated from Sammamish High School in 2019 and is attending college in Michigan, and the other is a junior at Sammamish High School. She has a vested interest in our community and our schools, and one of her goals is to help people really understand how schools are funded and the difference they can make to our school communities. With that, welcome, Melissa.
So I am going to talk about school finance for the Bellevue School District. And can you guys see my screen at this point? A quick yes in the chat or in the Q&A would be great. Okay, perfect. Perfect. We'll get started then. So tonight I'm going to talk about 4 different things. The first is going to be like, where do we get our money from? That is so important, right? Everybody says, people just don't know how money flows into the school district. A lot of people think that all of their property taxes go to the school district, and that's just not the case. So I'm going to talk about where we get our money from. I'm going to talk about how we use our money, where does it go, and if all the money is the same and if we can funnel it to different things depending upon our needs. I'm going to talk a little bit about what drives our costs in the school district and how we use our money. And then I'm going to talk about how you can support the school district from a financial perspective moving forward. Okay, so those are the quick topics. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is where do we get our money from? And we get it from 4 different places, basically. So we get it from the state government. We get it from our local property taxes. We get it from the federal government. And we get it from donations, grants, and tuition. So these are the 4 areas that we get our money from. And then I'm going to talk about each one a little bit more. So for the state government, the state gives us what they call an appropriation, and that is really based on our enrollment. So the more kids we have, the more money we get from the state. The fewer kids, the less money we get from the state. We also get from the state money for specific things like special education and transportation are 2 of the big ones. So what the state did was they have this prototypical school model. And what they say is that for an elementary school with 400 students, you should have 1 principal, so many teachers, so many custodians, so many nurses, and they figure out then how much all of that will cost based upon their salary models. And then they apply that to the number of students that we have. And so that's kind of what they call the prototypical school model. What do you think a school should look like? And then here are all the funds that you get with that. And then they do have the special purpose funds that I talked about, special ed, transportation, those types of things. The second place that we get our money from is our local property taxes. Now, we collect 3 different types of local property taxes, and each one has a very specific purpose. So the educational programs and operations levy, that we can use for our general fund, which is used for day-to-day operations. So we supplement what we get from the state with the funds from the educational programs and operations levy. That on your taxes right now is about, I'm going to say 65 cents per 1,000, then per 1,000 of assessed value. Then we have our capital and tech levy, and that we can use for very specific things. We can use it to purchase technology for our students and for our classrooms. We can use it for our infrastructure, and then we can also use it to maintain our buildings and to do significant improvements to our buildings, like new carpeting, new roofs, that type of thing. But we cannot use that money to pay for teachers' salaries, for example, or our day-to-day operations. We can only use it for those specific purposes. And then we also collect a debt service. And the debt service we can only use to pay off the bonds that we sell. And we sell those in order to build our new buildings. So when we have like a bond election, you're basically giving us permission to take on debt. And you're basically saying, if you take on debt, we will pay property taxes for you to pay that debt back. And so that's what those debt service funds go to, and they only go to that purpose. So that's the second pool of money that we get. The third pool of money that we get comes from the federal government. And some of these grants are very specific, and some of them are ongoing, and some of them are one-time funds. So special education funds we get every year from them. We also get things like Title I funds that are used in very specific schools. We also get money to support, professional development and things like that. So those are our federal grants. But we also then get extra funds depending on what's going on. And the most recent extra funds that we got were ESSER funds. And ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. And that is the recovery funds that we get from the federal government to support recovery. People have heard a lot about this money. They divided it up based upon the percentage of students experiencing poverty in your district to determine how much you got. And so for Bellevue School District, we received $22 million. And I know that that sounds like a lot of money, but when you look at our total operating budget being over $300 million, it's less than 10%. There are other districts who had the same or fewer students than we have that received $80 million, $90 million. So because it was distributed based on students experiencing poverty. I have pushed back pretty hard on that to the state and the federal government, asking them to supplement that a bit, because I believe that every student was impacted by COVID, and just focusing on students experiencing poverty while they were more heavily impacted kind of ignores a larger group of our students. So that money can be spent over multiple years, which is why you see only 12 million listed in our budget for the current school year. And then the last group of funds that we get is donations, grants, and tuition. And some of these are for very special purposes. So for example, we can apply for a grant from, say, from specific foundations, or the state or the city, for example, has grants at times, or the state will have grants, and then we can use them for those specific purposes. Or we can get donations that don't have a specific purpose, or they could have a specific purpose, depending upon what it is. Then we also collect other revenue. For example, we collect revenue for food services where people pay for their lunches. We also collect tuition for preschool or childcare. And so that's all kind of this other bucket of money that we get. So those are all of our revenue sources, and some of them need to be used one way versus the other. Now, one of the questions we always get is, well, how does this compare to others? Because schools are state funded, right? They're not funded really by the federal government. As you can see, we get very little money from the federal government. About 10% of our operating budget comes from the federal government. And so schools are really funded by the states. And so for the state of Washington, we are pretty much right dead smack in the middle in terms of the average for the United States. So the average funding for the United States is about $15,100, just a little over that. And you can see that we are $657 above the national average statewide. Now, I have to give the state credit because in 2014, now this is based on 2019 numbers, which are the most recent for every district in the United States. But in 2014, Washington State was $2,000 on a per pupil basis below the national average. And we were ranked 38th out of the 50 states, which is a pretty sad place for a state like Washington to be in. I mean, we're a wealthy state. I believe we're focused on education. I believe that education is a priority for our state. And so to be ranked 38th out of 50th in terms of funding of K-12 education is not a great place for the state to be. And so now we're ranked 19th out of the 50 states, which really is a much better place for us to be overall. But we are a long way from the top, which you can see is New York at 26,000 per pupil. Then you've got Vermont, Washington, D.C., Connecticut. You know, these are all pretty much those East Coast districts, and the first district, or East Coast states. And the first state that you have in the West is Wyoming. And the reason why Wyoming ranks so high is because they use their mineral release funds, which is the taxes that they collect when for mining or oil or that type of a thing. When minerals are taken out of the ground, they tax them. And so they put that money towards education in addition to other taxes, but that allows them to bump their education funding up pretty significantly. So it's interesting that with the exception of Wyoming, pretty much the top 10 states for funding education are all East Coast. So from Massachusetts up to New York, before you get to Illinois, Alaska, and then you still have East Coast with Rhode Island and Delaware. So that's just kind of an interesting perspective, I always thought. So that's where our money comes from. That's how much we get compared to others. Then the next question becomes, well, how do you use that money, right? So we have funds, and you know, it's kind of interesting because sometimes you can think of them as like your checking account versus your savings account. But with our funds, you cannot use them for anything that you want to necessarily. And there are restrictions on them. And so sometimes we'll say things like, all money is not green, because it doesn't all spend the same, right? Whereas in many businesses or other places, you can spend your money on whatever you want to, but that is not the case with school districts. So our first and one of our most important funds is our general fund. And our general fund is for our day-to-day operations. So the majority of our teachers' salaries come out of our general fund. The state money that we get in comes in, but teacher salaries, operating costs, utilities, all of those things come out of our general fund. And those are our day-to-day operations, right? Then we have our capital projects fund. And so the money that goes into that is from the sale of bonds and from our capital and tech levy that we talked about earlier. And so that can only be used for building improvements, for purchasing technology, and for the construction of new buildings. In fact, the sale of bonds and the bond funds that we receive can only be used for the construction projects that were approved when voters voted on it. So we recently sold $100 million worth of bonds, and we're using those to expand the size of Newport High School is a big portion of them. We're also building a new transition program center for students in the transition program. And so, but bonds are used to build all the new schools that you see, or to do significant improvements or expansions of schools. Then we have our, whoops, I should have clicked, sorry. Then we have our debt service fund. And our debt service fund, the only thing that we use that for is to pay for the principal and interest on bonds. So we basically collect local taxes to cover the principal and interest on the bonds that are due in the coming fiscal year. And so when we sell bonds, the bonds basically can be paid back over a 20-year time frame. And we structure those to try and keep the amount that you pay for paying back that debt very level. And so we structure it so that the same amount of principal will be due in any given year. That way, you're not seeing your property taxes swing up and down depending upon what's due in any given year. And then the last fund that we have is our ASB fund. And this is really used at the schools by the students. These are school-based funds. They're owned by the students. So while we account for them and hold them, the students develop the budgets for them, and they distribute them to various clubs and activities within their school. They are built based on our student-based fees, our student ASB fees, and they really direct the use of them. The district has no say over how those are spent. But the key here is that we cannot move money between these funds. Wherever that money is, it's got specific purposes that it can be used for, and so it doesn't go back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to really focus on our general fund because that is the biggest one, and that is the one that's used for the largest variety of things. So we always hear, you know, I want to put out there right away, we always hear that the district is top heavy. You spend a lot of money on administration. So I really just wanted to show you guys, what do we really spend money on? And so the biggest piece that we spend it on is teaching and student support, right? 250 million of our $327 million budget is designated for teaching and student support. Student support is things like counselors, psychologists, and other educators that aren't necessarily in a classroom day to day. So these are all things that impact students directly. Then we have our building maintenance and operations. So this is things like our custodial staff, our utilities, making sure that our buildings are fully maintained. When a window breaks, we replace it, all of that kind of stuff. And that's $18.3 million every year. Then we have our school office and school budgets. So this is our principals at all 28 schools and their office staff. So whether it be at a high school where you have an accountant or office managers or administrative supports, that's 18.6 million, again, interacting with students on a daily basis. Then we have our health and safety budget, and this has grown significantly in the last year because of COVID. So I'm sure you guys recognize that. But that is where like the masks come into play and all those other things we had to buy for COVID. But it also includes our nursing staff, for example, is in this bucket of money. Then we have the extracurricular and sports, and that's 5.5 million. Beyond the fees that we collect, we only collect about 200,000 every year in fees from student athletes. And then we've got the nutrition and transportation budget. So really, by and large, 87% of our $376.3 million in our budget goes directly to students. So that leaves $448.6 million for district-wide support. And there are really two different buckets that falls in. One is curriculum and teaching support. So that's figuring out what do we want our math curriculum to be, purchasing all of those materials and distributing it to all the schools, math curriculum, language arts curriculum, etc. And it's the teaching support is really professional development for our teachers. And then the other is district administration, which is $11.6 million. That includes me, that includes our budget and finance office, that includes the superintendent's office, our accounting, human resources, the supervisors of our principals, you know, all of that kind of piece, the supervisors and leaders of like special education department and all of that. So really 11.6 million is a lot of money, but it is not a lot when you look at the total spend that we have in our district. All right. So the other question is, well, what do you spend on? The fact is, we are a people business, right? We are a people business. We serve people. And so we spend 84% of our budget on people, salaries and benefits. 167 million is spent on certificated staff. Certificated staff includes our teachers, other educators, which are like our occupational therapists, OTPTs, physical therapists, our principals are certificated staff, nurses are certificated staff. So there's a lot of different people that fall into counselors, psychologists. All of those folks are certificated staff, people who need a certificate to perform the duties that they're assigned. Then we have our classified staff, which are by definition people who don't need a certificate, but it's our accountants, our custodians, our office managers. So people that really, bus drivers, people who provide support in a lot of times to our buildings, to our schools. It's also our paraprofessionals, our general school assistants that are there to support the schools and their operations. So they oversee lunch, they oversee recess, that type of stuff. And that's 62 million. And then for all of those employees, our employee benefits are about $87 million annually. And so that includes things like medical insurance that you guys all have, and long-term disability, short-term disability, our retirement system, which is a benefit of working for the school district, obviously, and so other things there. That leaves $61 million that we use for two primary things. One is supplies and materials. So that's all the papers, books, et cetera. And the second is purchase services. Purchase services are professional services, or it could be insurance, legal fees, all of those types of things. And then we use $2 million for other. I put it as other. $1 million of that is travel, and the other $1 million is spread over a few different things. So a lot of our money goes to the people that work with kids on a daily basis and work in our schools on a daily basis. And then the other components are pretty small in comparison to that. So our focus is, when we're developing our budget and other things, it's always students first, and that is where we try and put the majority of our money. So here's the thing about school districts. There's a lot of things that impact our costs and our revenue. And the biggest thing is our enrollment. And so the way that our budgeting process works is every January, February timeframe, we come up with an enrollment forecast. And we look at how many kids we've had in the school district in the past, how many are rolling up, how quickly is the area growing. And we look at individual schools as well. Are kids moving between schools or in specific schools? And so we come up with a forecast literally by school, by grade. Now, historically, and we use a demographer to do this, so it's not just me, kind of putting my thumb up and kind of figuring it out, but we use a demographer, and he does all sorts of things. He looks at birth rates, he talks to employers. There's a thing about, employers, jobs driving families, right? So families move where jobs are. He looks at our housing costs, right? Our housing costs have been going up pretty significantly in the area, and he looks at, who can afford to buy in our area. So he looks at a lot of different components, and he forecasts our enrollment. And as I said earlier, like all of our state funding is based on enrollment, and even part of our local funding is based on enrollment. So our education programs and operations levy, which is a levy that goes into our general fund, that is limited by the state based on enrollment. So we can only collect up to just over $2,600 per student in that local tax. So It's not like we can say, you know, we want 100 million in this local tax. Even if you vote to approve it as voters, we can't collect it. The only thing we can collect is up to that limit. So enrollment significantly impacts our revenue picture. It also significantly impacts our cost, right? So we forecast what our enrollment's going to be, and then we look at staffing, and we look at how many teachers do we need, in which buildings, at what grade levels, for what subjects. And we staff our classrooms based on ratios, and we do it by grade level, by school. We basically target the smallest class sizes at K1, 2, 3, a little bit larger at 4, 5, a little bit bigger in middle school, and then the largest being in high schools. And so based on all that, then we know how many teachers we're going to hire. We know how much support we're going to need. And then we look at other specialty programs like special education and what kind of supports we need there. We look at English language learners and what kind of support we need there. And so class size and staffing are the next biggest things that drive our costs. So when a district is growing, that's pretty good, right? So you know that you're going up in enrollment, and so you tend to hire a few extra staff, and just in case you get more than you thought, and just in case enrollment moves between buildings and you have to add a teacher here or a teacher there come the fall. But that has not been the case the last 2 years with the pandemic. With the pandemic, enrollment has been dropping. And so we lost about 700 kids in the first year of the pandemic, and we lost another 700 to 800 in the last year of the pandemic. And so we're down just over 1,500 kids in the 2 years. And we need to cut costs, and you'd think that we could cut all the costs associated with those 1,500 kids. The problem comes in that those 1,500 kids leave out of 28 different schools and 13 different grade levels, right? So when they leave like that, they don't leave in even bunches, right? And so maybe you lose 4 third graders at Cherry Crest. Well, I can't really pull a teacher when I lose 4 third graders at Cherry Crest. And so the problem is there are some places where you can have fewer teaching staff, but it is not a one-to-one relationship. You don't get to pull a teacher for every 20 kids that leave the district, right? So part of the question is, well, where are these kids going? You know, every year we have like 700 kids leave the district, okay? We have about the same number of kids leave the district. It's just that we're not replenishing them right now. And there's a lot of reasons why. We have lost students to private schools, a little bit more recently than we have in the past, but that only accounts, from what we can tell in terms of where records have transferred to and requests were made, that only counts for about 200 of those 1,500 kids. The other places we've lost kids to are the tech companies are not hiring as many workers from out of the country on H-1B visas. And so we don't have those kids coming back in, right? So those are the couple of year visas where they come, they live here, they work here, their kids go to school here. We have a lot of corporate housing in our district. And you can see that drop in enrollment, for example, when you look at specific schools like Wilburton, like Clyde Hill. They've lost large numbers of kids. I mean, Wilburton's down like 100 kids this year, which is a big number for that school. And so, so the H-1B visas is a big issue that we've experienced. The second big issue that we've experienced is families that have left the country to go back to their home countries during the pandemic are not getting the visas. Visas are not being processed at nearly the speed that they were. And so they're not getting the visas to come back. And we hear from these families quite a bit saying, you know, we've put in for the visa, we've applied for it. It just hasn't been processed yet. We're planning to come back. And so, so we've got that kind of dynamic going on right now where families cannot get back into the country after they've left. And we're hoping some of that loosens up as well. And the third issue that we have is our home prices. Our home prices have gone up faster than some of our neighboring communities. We do not have the land in our community to build like new subdivisions and other things where we can build like small lot, single family homes. A lot of what's going on here is the scraping and building, right? So you see a house sell for 800, 900,000, and then it gets scraped, and then it gets new construction, and now that same property is selling for 2 million, 2.2 million. And so it has slowed the number of families moving into our district just because the housing costs are pretty significant here, especially when you compare it to some of our neighboring districts like Renton, even some homes in Issaquah. And so it's really, that has slowed our enrollment as well. We do have a lot of housing units coming in to our area, but those are all multifamily housing homes, and we don't get the same number of kids out of those as we get out of a single family home. So a lot of that different dynamic is going on right now with our enrollment, and we'll have to see kind of how that plays out moving forward. So it's just important to understand kind of what's happening there. And we're going to have some work to do to work through all of that. All right, so how can you support our district? So there's a couple of ways. The first is through our various levies. We do have an election coming up. These levies are really important to us. They expire every 4 years. And so it's really important that they get renewed. And so the election will be in February. And this is what we kind of use our, I talked about the general fund and what do we use our local education program and ops levy for. The state does not fully fund education. Bottom line. The best examples I have, for example, are special education. They basically underfund our special education services by close to $30 million every year. They fund class sizes at higher levels. They fund 4th and 5th grade class sizes at 27. Our average this year is 22, 23. Now, of course, there are some higher, some lower, but that is the average that we're at for 4th and 5th grade. They fund 3 nurses for our entire district. We need more nurses. They don't fund anything for athletics. They don't fund music, art, band, orchestra. So they don't fully fund education. And at a minimum, they do not fully fund education in terms of what our community expects for our students. And so that is what we use our local levy to fund. One of the things here that happens is our levies expire every 4 years. That's not true for a significant part of the United States. Many of the states, once you vote a levy in, an education levy in, then it will stay there. So I think it's just important for you to know that our levies expire here and we need to renew them every 4 years. Second way that you can support is through the Bellevue Schools Foundation. Our foundation allows us to innovate. They funded computer science at elementary schools. That is huge for us in terms of being able to begin the interest in STEM, especially for our female students, because as you all know, there is a significant push and drive to get more female students into STEM interests and STEM programs. And the earlier you can do that, the better. They provide equity and access and opportunities for students through preschool tuition programs. They supported the Signs of Suicide program, which is hugely important as the pandemic came in. They had the foresight to fund that prior to. And so they are really important to us because they allow us to go beyond what is traditionally funded in schools. And they allow us to explore things that that we couldn't explore otherwise, and to look at them and then look at getting them into our schools on a regular basis, depending upon the success of the programs, right? And so we're expanding computer science at elementary schools beyond those that were initially working through that program. So it's really important to donate, because they do allow us to do things and to explore things and to get new things into our buildings, which is huge. The other local levy that we're running is our capital and tech levy that we talked about. It is so critical. It was so critical for us to have that, you know, back in March of 2020 when everybody was sent home. It allowed us to get devices into kids' hands at the elementary level within that first week of being home. That is not true for many school districts, right? And so it really provides technology to kids. It gives them access to the digital equipment, and it allows us to have the technology in our classrooms to support our teachers and to give our educators the professional development they need to integrate technology into their instruction. So it does a lot of things for us to really support our kids. Again, this expires every 4 years. It's limited in terms of what we're allowed to use it on, but we use it on some very important things for our kids in our buildings. One of the questions with levies always is, well, what is this going to do to our taxes? Property taxes are an interesting thing, and they're really confusing to many people. But there's a couple of things that you should know. One is that all your property taxes don't go to schools. They go to the county, they go to the state, they go to the city. So there's a broad group where they go to. If we really want to see where they all go, the King County Assessor's website is a great place to look, and you can see how much is charged in any different thing. Even your taxes that go to schools don't all come to us directly. So $3.09 per every $1,000 of your value of your home goes to the state. And that is the money then that comes back to us through that prototypical school model and through appropriations. But here's the thing. All of the counties or all of the districts on the west side of our state help fund the districts on the east side of our state. We're in the property rich districts, and so we generally put more money in than we get back, but that's part of being part of a state, and it's important that all the kids in our state have access to equitable education opportunities, at least at a basic education level. So you basically pay us $2.60 per $1,000 of assessed value. The other thing that's really important to know, as I said, we're limited on the amount we can collect, and we levy an amount. We don't levy a rate. So we say we're going to collect $55 million, $60 million. If the assessed value in our area goes up, then the rate that we're collecting will drop because we levy an amount. So a lot of people think when their assessed value goes up, they're paying more taxes, and that could be because, like, the state, for example, levies a rate. And so if your assessed value goes up, you are paying more, but your local school district only levies an amount. And so if assessed values go up 10%, then your rate will drop. And as long as your value goes up at an equal rate as the total assessed value of the district, then you're going to be paying the same amount of money as you were in previous years. So that's just one thing that's really important and different for your local taxes. The other question we always get, well, how do our local taxes compare to others? Look, Bellevue is a property rich district. We have large companies. You know, Microsoft is our largest taxpayer. Amazon is probably going to be coming in there and pushing them for that as they move into our downtown area. The Bellevue collection pays a lot of property taxes. The value of the buildings and things that they own is way up there. And it allows us to keep our local rate down at $2.60 per 1,000 of assessed value. And you can look at some of the other district it compares to. I mean, Auburn is the highest in King County at $5.20 per 1,000. And I don't think the homes in Auburn are half the value of the homes in Bellevue. They may not be the same value, but they are not half the value. So they are definitely paying more locally in Auburn than we are up here in Bellevue. The last thing I just want to say about these levies is, so if the levies go away and are not passed, basically, if these levies are in place, then they will cost $1,330 a year. But please remember, you're already paying that, right? You're already paying that because the levies that you're paying now will expire. And so hopefully we'll just continue them and continue to pay this so that the district can continue to offer the services that we do. And the levies equal about 20% of what we spend annually in our general fund. So they're a pretty significant portion of it. So I hope I covered everything that you're interested in seeing. I hope I held your attention. It's hard to do this over a video because I can't see the audience and I can't see kind of what you're thinking or things I should go deeper in or not. But I am happy to answer questions for the next 15 minutes or so. And I know we have one. If the district has a certain amount of students that are enrolled but are not attending, does that impact the monies received? So not as significantly as you would think. The money that we received is really based on monthly enrollment. So it does move kind of over the course of the year. Attendance is hugely important to the education of students. We do have kids that have truancy issues and other things. There is a time limit. I think it's like 4 weeks. So if a student doesn't show up for 4 weeks, then I know that they go into truancy, but we do unenroll them. And then obviously it will impact the amount that we receive after that. So yes, it does, but only after a certain amount of time if they don't attend at all. So, talk about the budgeting process a little bit further. Yeah, so basically it's all driven off of enrollment. And then the most significant piece of it is obviously staff. And so we do align it to the schools by grade, by level. But, you know, it's interesting at the high schools and middle schools, you know, we basically provide them with 22 or 23. For every 22 or 23 students, we provide them with a teacher at the middle schools and high schools. But master scheduling really impacts their class sizes. And so it's kind of a mixture between the amount of staff that they have, the courses the kids are taking, and how many kids enroll in every course that kind of move their class sizes around, right? And so you will see in a high school, for example, you will see band or PE with these huge numbers of kids in those courses. But then you'll see like some of the level 4 world languages with a small group of kids in their courses. And sometimes you'll see kind of some mixed classrooms for different levels because of, you can't just have 5 kids in a classroom, right? Because then it impacts how many kids are in these other classrooms. And so they really try and balance that out. But master schedule has a lot to do with class sizes at the high school levels and middle school levels, which is interesting. At the elementary school levels, you know, I know class size is a huge topic for people. So the elementary school levels, you know, we'll forecast how many kids are coming in, and we'll try and figure out like the number of kids that would be great in a classroom. But as you kind of do that, we try and leave like room. But then sometimes if you get 1 or 2 kids that you weren't expecting in there, then all of a sudden that class gets large. And so now maybe you're at 27 or 28 kids, but it's not enough to add another teacher, you know? So because let's say it's a 5th grade class and it's at 28 kids, which is a little high for us. But if I add in another teacher, then I'd have these classes at 20 in 5th grade, which is pretty small for 5th grade. And so we try and do some things to supplement, like give them aid time and things like that, as opposed to necessarily adding another full-time teacher. So it is a balancing act. And so sometimes you'll get a large class, sometimes you'll have a little bit smaller class. The interesting thing is that, you know, for parents, they only see the classes their kids are in, right? And so let's say last year I had 23 kids in my students class, and now this year all of a sudden I have 27. Then I think class sizes are going up. Well, they're kind of not, but your class size did, right? And so, and I get that, but so anyways, it's kind of managing all of that across all of it. All right, let's see. How much per $1,000 that levy goes to state support other school district? Does this include the $2.60? No. So the $3.09 goes directly to the state, and then it comes back to us in apportionment. And I would say rough order of magnitude, we probably get 85 to 87% of that back in our apportionment. And then that other percent is spread out to other districts based upon state apportionment, right? So we don't fund just locally. We fund, the state funds education. And that's true in many states that it processes that way. Like I know in Colorado, that's absolutely true. The districts around the Denver area helped fund the school districts in the more rural areas so that they could offer a physics class, for example, or chemistry class, because if they have a high school of 500 kids, I mean, some of our districts in the state only have 500 kids in them. And so for them to be able to offer an education that balances that between all the grade levels and things, really, they need funding from the rest of our districts and our areas. So the $2.60 is local money. And so that's in addition to the $3.09. And that $2.60 comes directly to us for our educational programs and operations levy, for our capital and tech levy, and then for our debt service to pay back on the bonds. So it comes to us in those three things. Among the more discretionary areas of the budget, what are the top priorities for the near future? So the top priorities for the near future is recovery, right? And that's like short-term coming out of this pandemic. And so the recovery is focused on a couple of things. The first thing it's focused on is social emotional well-being. And that is mental health supports for kids, counseling supports for kids, really teaching kids how to be in school again, especially for younger kids who've been out of school for a while, teaching them what a school system is and what the expectations of their behavior are. That, you know, surprisingly was a pretty big thing in the fall as we got kids back in. And so there's additional work that we have to do around that. So social emotional well-being, social interactions among kids and groups, that type of thing. The second is academic recovery. So there was a loss in academics. In fact, it was across the nation. And the biggest losses were in mathematics as opposed to language arts and reading, believe it or not. And so we are doubling down on math. We've got co-teachers working with kids. We've got tutors working with kids one-on-one who are behind. We've got a new math curriculum that we've introduced. So there's a lot of things that we're doing around the math area. Then the second thing that we're doing, so that's kind of short term, right? You can almost think of it as tactical stuff. Long term, we're really not, I would say not like long term, but like say 2 to 5 years, right? Strategically, we are focusing on the creators of their future world part of our vision. And so there is a part of our vision that talks about kids and students who graduate being the creators of their future world. Like, how do they impact the world in which they live? And so in order to do that, we are looking at bringing in into our curriculum, throughout our curriculum, an area that's called global competency. And it really deals with 4 different tenets that you want to build in. So it doesn't mean we're not going to do math or English or any of that, but the question is around that, to what purpose, right? Why are you learning this stuff? To what purpose? And it really looks at looking at problems from multiple perspectives, being able to communicate cross-language, cross-culturally with other people, being able to create action to make changes in your world. And what does that look like? And so I'm really excited about this stuff because I think it takes our education for our students to the next level, right? And so we're doing a lot of work around developing what that looks like and how you spread that throughout our curriculum from kindergarten through high school seniors. So stay tuned, more to come on that. Lots of work happening on that, but I personally think it's the next level of education for our kids. And I think it will hugely impact our kids in a positive way. So it's pretty exciting stuff. Where are the emerging funds that needed to be drawn down during the pandemic? Are you satisfied with our current level of emergency fund savings? So I'm not sure I fully understand that. If that is the ESSER funds, the elementary and secondary emergency relief funds from the federal government. So we got $22 million. Am I satisfied with that level? No. Everything that I've looked at and read basically says that it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to fully get our students back. The most critical focus I think we have is our high schoolers, right? Because they don't have that much longer with us, right? So we have got to work there first, but we have to work throughout our district as well. But, you know, our high schoolers are going to be graduating and then they're going to be going off to college. And we want to make sure that they have what they need to be successful in whatever they choose to do, whether they go to college, whether they go into other things. We want to make sure that they have the foundation they need in order to be successful. So that's super important to us. But if it really is a 3 to 5 year window, $22 million is not going to go far, right? $5 million a year, that is not a significant amount of money. So no, I'm not satisfied with it. We got about $1,100 per student, where there are, the average across our state in terms of the amount was $3,200 per student. So we got about a third of the average. So we're way down in the bottom, right? We're down in the bottom, Issaquah's down in the bottom, North Shore is the lowest, Mercer Island's down there, Lake Washington is down there. Lake Washington, Issaquah, Mercer Island, and North Shore are all below us even. So no, we're not satisfied with that. And we've talked to a lot of different people about it, and we're continuing to talk to our legislatures and others to hopefully get the state to supplement some of that for us, because it is super important. And by only including the students experiencing poverty in the distribution of those funds, which by the way was dictated by the federal government, that was not a state decision. But by only including that, they miss other kids that, number one, all of our kids were impacted to a certain extent. Number two, students with special needs were heavily impacted, and none of those students were taken into consideration with this distribution decision, right? So that huge bucket is missing. Our students that are multi-language learners, right, that were more significantly impacted. None of that was taken into consideration. So I do think there's work to be done there, and we just need to continue to work with our legislators to see if they can backfill that. But in the meantime, you know, right now our plan is to spend those funds over 2 years, $10–12 million a year, because you have to invest enough to make something happen, right? If you invest too little, then you're not going to get any impact. You know, we've all seen that before. So we need to invest enough to get an impact, but we don't want to spend it all in 1 year because we know it's going to take longer than 1 year. So it's a balancing act for sure. What is the allocation for mental health, and can there be an increase from this year considering the recent loss of our student? Yes. So so we tripled what we are investing in mental health between last year and this year. Like, we've tripled what we typically invest in mental health. We know it is significantly important, and part of the discussion about how we can up it is, what are we going to give up, right? So we have a box of funds, and so we know that mental health is significantly important. We are prioritizing it. We also need to look at, okay, where does that money come from? And those are the decisions that we need to be making in order to do that. So it is hugely important. I get it. But that's kind of the trade-off that we have, right? And so we'll continue to look at those things and invest in them. And I'm hoping the state recognizes the importance of mental health and starts putting some funding into that in that prototypical school model, because right now they are not, right? So that's another place where you guys can help us in terms of reaching out to your legislators and saying, hey, look, we know that mental health is very important. We want to see that as part of the regular funding model for schools. So that would help immensely. Vis-a-vis special ed and mental health, what do you fund more? We fund more in special education than we do mental health. Special education services are obviously critical. The degree of needs varies significantly from student A to student B to student C. And those are all driven by individualized, I'm not gonna get it right, but it's IEPs. So it's individual education plan. And so those kind of dictate, and those are developed between the teacher, the parent, like a team develops those for each student. And that's what basically says which services kids need. So I don't know that those trade off with each other, but there are other things that we can look at. You know, we need to look at the programs that we do offer and say, okay, you know, where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck right now? And I know that mental health is a huge piece that we need to continue to look at and continue to look at the most effective ways of funding it, for sure. All right. It is 6:01. Those are all my questions. Perfect timing. I hope this was really informative for all of you. Again, it's so hard over video when nobody's here for me to talk to. I felt like I've been talking to myself for an hour, but I hope it was really informative for you. They did record it, so I'm hoping some people can watch it in a recording. Tell your friends, and yeah, thank you. Bye.